In this lesson, this is an intro to dividing rational expressions, and so we're dealing with this rational expression, and what we're going to do is we're going to simplify it. And when we simplify it, notice that there is division going on, but first we must find its factors before we try to go ahead and do any division. Now, another thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and there's going to be some restrictions on this, because we can't have 0 in our denominator. And so in that situation, we would call that a restriction. And so I'm going to show you how to write those restrictions out after your answer. So first of all, the first thing we want to do is I'm going to write first over here. We want to factor the numerator and denominator. So factor the numerator and denominator. So let's go ahead and do that. So notice we have x squared plus 3x minus 28. So I'm going to factor that one first. So x squared plus 3x minus 28. Now keep in mind that when we're factoring this, we want to find the product of negative 28. So we want to find all the factors that would multiply to give us 28. So I'm going to write a 28 up here. And I know that it's going to be 1 in 28. And then I'm going to go ahead and I like just going through and using my calculator to check it. I'm going to say, well, can 2 go into 28? So I'm going to take 28 divided by 2, and it gives me 14. And then I'm going to say, well, can 3 go into 28? And notice it gives me a decimal strand, so it can't. So then I check what's after 3, which is 4. And notice I'm just going in order. 1, 2, 3, 4. And notice it works, and it says it's 4 and 7. Now the only numbers I have left to check to see if it can go into 28 would be 5 and 6, because in between 4 and 7 are 5 and 6. So I know that 5 won't go into it, but just to show you, it won't, right? It gives me a decimal, because we only want whole numbers. And so then I'm going to go ahead and do 28 divided by 6, and notice it doesn't go in either. And we already have a 7 right here. So we're done. These are all the factors for this particular number, 28. Now what I want to do is I want to see if I add the number or subtract it from the number that's beside it. In other words, this set of factors that can be multiplied to give me 28. I want to know, can that create a 3? So I'm going to look at this b value next. So I'll just circle it real quick, and notice 1 plus 28 gives me 29, and 28 minus 1 gives me 27. So it can't be 1 and 28. 2 plus 14 gives me 16. 14 minus 2 gives me 12. So it can't be 2 and 14. 4 plus 7 gives me 11. But 7 minus 4 gives me 3. So I know that this is going to be my factor. Now, the next thing I need to do is to determine, are they both going to be positive? Is one going to be positive and one be negative? Is one going to be negative and one positive? Are they both going to be negative? And so as I go through this process, if you're not sure how to figure out which one should be positive or negative, you need to remember that, right, that these two numbers must multiply to give you a negative 28, and they must combine together, in other words, add together, to give you a positive 3. And you can always guess and check if you're not sure. Like, for instance, we're going to go ahead and check and see, what if they're both positive? What numbers would they give us? So I'm going to take positive 4 and multiply it to positive 7, and notice it gives me a positive 28, which is not a negative 28. So I already know that that's not going to work. They both can't be positive. Now, on the other hand, if I took positive 4 and I added positive 7 to it, it would give me 11. So again, right, we're looking for a 3. So then you can say, well, what if the 4 was positive and the 7 was negative? Okay, so positive 4 plus negative 7. That would give me a negative 3, not a positive. So that eliminates that possibility. Now, if I were to multiply it 4 times negative 7, it does give me negative 28. But because the addition didn't work out, it's still not correct. So let's try both being negative. So if I had a negative 4, and then I added a negative 7, that would give me negative 11. So it doesn't match that 3 value. And if I multiply negative 4 times negative 7, it'd give me a positive 28, which is the opposite sign of what I need. So the only option would be negative and positive. So the 4 is going to be negative, and the y is going to be positive. And I get that directly from checking these 4 different options. And these are the only 4 combinations that it could possibly be. But let me put these in. So if I have negative 4 plus 7, positive 7, it does give me a positive 3, which is what I have for B. And then if I go ahead and I take negative 4 and multiply it to positive 7, it does give me negative 28, which is what I have for C. So I know that these are my factors. So I have x minus 4 and x plus 7. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of block this off. And so I'm going to go ahead and start rewriting this problem, because we are going to do some division, but we're going to do it with the factors. So let me write, we have x minus 4 and we have x plus 7. And that was for this first one, right? Those are its factors. Now we do need to find the factors of the second one as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So I have x squared plus 5x minus 14 plus 5x minus 14. I'm going to go ahead and create my factor tree just like I did on the other problem, because we're going to follow the same process. Now on this one, right, my C value is 14, so I'm going to put a 14 here. So my factors are 1 and 14, and I always start with 1. And our goal is to get a 5, but right now I'm just going to focus on the factors. So I'm going to take 14 and say, can it be divided by 2? And it can. We get 2 and 7. So 2 and 7. So the only other numbers I have left to check are 3, 4, 5, and 6. So 14 be divided by 3. Nope, it doesn't work. 14 divided by 4 doesn't work. 14 divided by 5 doesn't work. 14 divided by 6 doesn't work. We got decimals with all those values, and 7 comes after 6, right? And notice I just went in order, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm dividing 14 by the numbers in order. So these are all of my factors. Now I know that I can't get a 5 from a 1 and a 14, because 14 plus 1 gives me 15, and 14 minus 1 gives me 13. So I'm going to cross it out. Now 2 plus 7 gives me 9, but 7 minus 2 gives me 5. So I know that these are my factors. And now I just got to figure out, are they both going to be positive? Is one going to be positive and one going to be negative? One's going to be negative, one's going to be positive. Or are they both going to be negative? So we'll go ahead and we're going to test out our ideas. So if I take this and I make both of them positive, I have 2 times 7, which does give me 14. But notice it's not negative, it's a positive 14. So that should tell us right there it's not going to be the first one. And then now let's try a positive and a negative. So positive 2 times negative 7. And that does give me negative 14. So now I'm going to combine them and see if it gives me the value of 5. So positive 2 plus negative 7. That gives me a negative 5. So I know that it's not going to be that one. Now I'm going to try negative and positive. Negative 2 times positive 7. It does give me a negative 14, which is what I have for C. So that one checks out. And then I'm going to go in and do negative 2 plus positive 7. And it gives me positive 5. So I know that this is going to be negative. The 2 is going to be negative. And the 7 is going to be positive. Now I can go ahead and write my factors for this one. So my factors for this one are going to be x minus 2 and x plus 7. So I'm going to go ahead and write those factors down here in the denominator, because that's where they belong. So x minus 2 and x plus 7. So now we have our factors, and we're going to go ahead and go to step 2. So step 2, eliminate like factors by dividing. So I'm looking for anything that's the same between the numerator and the denominator. So for instance, here we have x minus 4 and x minus 2. Those are not alike, so they're going to remain. But notice we have x plus 7 and x plus 7. So these are going to cancel out, because anything that's the same can divide into itself one time. And there's no point in putting a 1 over here, because you would just multiply the 1 to the x minus 4, multiply 1 to x minus 2, and it would just stay the same. So in other words, when they cancel, they are gone. They are now out of the mix, and we're going to bring down our final answer. And my final answer is going to be x minus 4. And I'll just write it like this, x minus 4 over x minus 2. Now, there are going to be restrictions on this. And remember, I told you we cannot have a 0 in our denominator. And so, therefore, x cannot be equal to certain values. And the way we find our restriction is always going to be with the set that we have canceled out. So we're going to take this set that we canceled out, and we're going to set it up as an equation. So I'm going to block this off and show you what I mean by that. So we had x plus 7. So if I take x plus 7 and I set it equal to 0, right? And remember, we cannot be equal to 0. So x plus 7 equals 0. I'm going to go ahead and subtract 7 from both sides. And I got x is equal to negative 7. So this is going to be one of our restrictions. Because if x were to be negative 7, then, and I were to substitute a negative 7 in place of x, I would have negative 7, and just to show you what I'm talking about, I would have negative 7 plus positive 7, and that would give me 0. And we can't have that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up here where it says x can't be equal to, well, it can never be equal to negative 7. And that is my restriction. And this is my final answer. Now, sometimes you will have more than just 2 terms. 2 binomials cancel out. Sometimes you might have 3. And just remember, right, set them equal to 0. And after you set them equal to 0, especially if there's like a number, a coefficient in front of the x, and do your math to solve for x, and whatever it's equal to is going to be your restriction. And you need to put, at the end of your answer, after you have what's left over, you need to put comma, x cannot be equal to whatever those restrictions are. And last of all, if you have more than one restriction, like for instance, let's say we had 2 other restrictions, after this negative 7, I would just put a comma and put the next restriction, and a comma and the next restriction, and so on, until all of them were accounted for, and then box the answer.